Robinson Crusoe, Chapter 1. Family. I was born in York, England, in 1633. My father was German and my mother was English. I had two older brothers and a younger sister. The oldest brother joined the army and he was killed in battle. The middle one disappeared and we never heard what happened to him. I was well educated and my father wanted me to study law, but I wanted to go to sea. Nothing would make me stay at home and become a lawyer. I was 18 years old when my father called me to his room. He was old and he suffered from an illness which kept him in bed. My father asked me why I wanted to go to sea when I could stay at home, study and prosper in my own country. He told me that traveling by sea was dangerous. He warned me that I would lose safety and comfort of my home if I went to sea. My father also told me that if I went abroad, I could die like my oldest brother. When he was saying this, he started to cry and he couldn't continue. My father's advice and warnings made me think, and I started to forget my desire to travel by sea. But my decision to stay home didn't last long. 1 week passed, and I decided to talk to my mother and tell her I wanted to travel. I told her how curious I was. I told her how I wanted to see the world. Then I asked her to speak to my father. I asked her to tell him to let me go on one sea journey. I promised that if I didn't like it, I would go back home and start working very hard. My mother didn't agree. She also didn't want me to go abroad. I stayed home 1 more year. The whole time I was thinking whether to follow my parents' wish or my own desire. One day in September, I was in the town of Hull. A friend of mine was going with his father's ship to London, and he invited me to go with him for free. I wasn't prepared, and my parents didn't know. But I boarded that ship on that September day. The moment the ship left the river and went into the sea, my troubles started. There was strong wind and the sea was rough. A storm was approaching. I was very scared and I felt seasick. I began to regret my decision to leave home. I thought every wave was going to sink the ship. I promised myself I would go home and apologize to my parents as soon as I stepped on dry land again. The storm was over by the morning. I was still seasick during the day, and I was thinking about the terrible storm. However, the evening was beautiful and the sea was very peaceful. One of the sailors came to me and we started talking. He made some funny jokes. He asked me what I thought about the light wind. I told him I was very scared of the storm. The sailor offered me a drink. I got drunk, and that night I slept very well. The next day I forgot how scared I was. I also forgot my decision to go back home. Instead, I was dreaming more about traveling by sea. The next few days, the wind was blowing against us, and we couldn't move much. 3 days later, the wind increased, and we could go faster. Chapter 2. Storm. The next day, there was a great storm. I was scared, and this time I could see that the other sailors were also very scared. The captain was walking in and out of his cabin. He was quietly saying prayers. I was so scared I could only lie in my bed and hope we would survive. When I looked out of the window of my cabin, I saw the waves. They were as tall as mountains. I saw other ships which looked like toys. The waves were playing with them. One sailor shouted that a ship went underwater in front of us. I was terribly afraid, and I regretted that I didn't go home after the first light storm. The storm was getting worse, and now all the sailors were praying we would survive. Suddenly, someone shouted that there was a hole in the ship and water was coming inside the ship. Everyone was called down to pump the water out. I was paralyzed with fear and I couldn't get out of my bed. Then one man came to me and told me to go down and help. So I went. I was pumping out the water when the captain ordered someone to fire a gun. It was a signal that we were in danger. I thought we were sinking because the ship was full of water. I thought we were all going to die. We were all working very hard, but the water kept coming into the ship. The storm wasn't as dangerous anymore, but the ship was already badly damaged. Our captain continued firing guns for help. There was a small ship in front of us, which sent us a boat. The sailors on that boat risked their lives, but managed to reach our ship. With great difficulty, we all boarded the boat. We couldn't think of going back to their ship, which was already very far. It was too dangerous, so we decided to try to get to coast instead. 15 minutes later, our ship went underwater. We were safe on the boat, but I was still very afraid. We were soon close to the land, and we could see many people on the beach. They were waiting for us. When we finally reached the land, the people were very nice to us. They helped us find rooms and gave us money to get to London or go back to Hull. I decided to go to London. I traveled to London by land. The whole way I was thinking what to do and where to go. I was too ashamed of myself to go back home. In London, I met the captain of another ship who often traveled to the coast of Africa. He offered me to travel with him. Before we left London, he advised me what to buy for trade in Africa. At that time, I only had 40 pounds. This journey was successful because I returned to England with some gold, which was worth almost 300 pounds. The journey was also good for me because the captain taught me something about mathematics and navigation. I learned what was necessary to become a sailor and a businessman. Soon after we came back to England, the captain died. I decided to make the same journey to Africa with the same ship, but another captain. This journey started well, but soon we had big problems. A ship started chasing us. It was a pirate ship. It continued the whole day. At about 3 in the afternoon, the pirates came very close. There was an attack, but we managed to push them away. On the second attempt, many of their men came on the ship and they started destroying everything. Some of our sailors were killed and some were injured, so we had to give up. All of us were taken prisoners. Chapter 3. Woman. I was young and strong. I became a slave to the captain of the pirates. I felt very sad. I was hoping the captain would take me with him when he went to sea. And when a Spanish or a Portuguese captain attacked him, I could be free. But this didn't happen because the captain left me to look after his garden every time he went to sea. One day, I met a young woman in the house. She was so beautiful. She was also a slave, and she cleaned the house. I tried to speak to her, but she didn't speak my language. But I felt that she understood me. I liked her very much. She was very attractive to me. Anytime she saw me, she always smiled at me. Sometimes she touched me when she was close to me, but it was only a short moment. If the captain saw it, he could send her away. She was on my mind very often. I wanted to meet her every day, but she wasn't in the house every day. When I thought of her, I felt a nice feeling in my heart. I knew I fell in love with that woman, but our relationship was complicated. We couldn't be officially together. Slaves couldn't have relationships. It was so sad. Sometimes when the captain went fishing, he took me and a boy to help him. Sometimes he even sent me and the boy with one of his relatives fishing in a small boat. One morning when we were fishing, thick fog came and we were lost. We struggled to reach the coast the whole day and the following night. But it was only the next morning that we finally got back. After this adventure, the captain decided to use a bigger boat, the one from our English ship, and make it more comfortable. It had a cabin in the middle of it, and it had good sailing equipment. One day, the captain ordered me to put extra food, drinks, and guns on the boat because he was expecting some important guests to join him for fishing. They also wanted to do some hunting later. However, the guests refused the offer at the last moment. Then the captain told me, "Prepare the boat for fishing for the next day." This was my opportunity to run away. A lot of guns and food were on the boat. I prepared the boat for fishing as usual, but I left the guns and food on the boat. The next day I could run away. This was my plan. I thought about the young woman. I wanted to take her with me, but I didn't know how to do it. It wasn't possible to take her on the boat. I was sad as I didn't know what to do. I wanted to be free, but my heart wanted to be with her. Then the morning came. I hoped that I could see the young woman in the house. I couldn't leave without seeing her for at least a short moment. Then I saw her. She was the most beautiful woman in my life. When I looked at her, our eyes met. She knew something was wrong. Maybe she understood that was our last moment together. She looked deeply in my eyes. Then she touched my hand. Her face was sad, and my face was sad too. She smiled at me a little. Then she went away. This was the last moment I saw her. 1 hour later, we were ready. I and the boy went to the boat. One of the captain's relatives went with us. He was our boss for that day. Soon we were far from the land. I pretended that I couldn't catch fish. Then our boss told us to go further from the land. He thought we could catch fish there. Chapter 4. Lion. At one moment, our boss went to the front of the boat, and I quickly pushed him to the sea. He tried to swim back to us. I took one of the guns and pointed it at him. I told him to swim back to the coast if he wanted to live. After he swam away, I turned to the boy and asked him to promise that he would be faithful to me. He did as I asked. After 2 years of life as a slave, I was finally free. We tried to go as fast as possible. The wind was good. We were far away from the pirate land the next day, but I was still scared of them. I didn't want to be caught again. I was so scared that I didn't let the boy stop the boat for 5 days. On the 6th day, I felt safer. We took the boat close to the land. We saw a little river. I didn't know where we were. We had to stop somewhere because we needed some fresh water. We waited until it was completely dark. We wanted to swim to the beach unseen and get water. But as soon as night came, we started hearing horrible noises from the beach. The boy asked me not to go to the beach. We remained on the boat, but we couldn't sleep. 2 hours later, some animals came to wash themselves in the water. They made horrible noises. The boy was extremely scared, and me too. We were even more scared when we heard one of the animals swim to us. The boy asked me to go away, but I didn't want to go away because we needed fresh water from the river. I took one of the guns and shot at the animal. I didn't kill it, but the animal turned around and it swam back to the beach. When the other animals heard the gun, they went away. We didn't hear the noises, but we were still scared. And we stayed on the boat until the morning. As soon as it was light again, we ate some bread for breakfast. Then we decided to go to the beach. We took our guns and 2 big bottles for the water, and we went to the beach. Once we were on the beach, I didn't want to lose sight of the boat, so the boy went alone a bit further inside the land to get some fresh water. He returned after some time. He was running. I thought that some animal was running after him, but I didn't see anything dangerous. He was hurrying to show me he killed an animal that looked like a chicken. We were both very glad because the meat was good, and we found fresh water. I didn't know where exactly we were. I only knew we went around the coast of Africa. I hoped we met an English ship when we went around the coast. I thought we were in a land where nobody lived. We didn't see any people on the land. We only heard wild animals. One morning when we were going to get water, the boy showed me a big lion sleeping in the shade near us. Then the lion woke up. When he saw us, he started to run to us. We didn't have much time. The boy was so scared he wasn't able to shoot. I had 3 guns. The first bullet hit his leg. The second bullet hit its head. He was seriously injured. The third bullet finished the animal. We couldn't eat the meat because it wasn't good, but we wanted the skin. The skin was very big. We put it on top of the boat, and soon it was dry. Chapter 5. Ship. For the next 10 days, we sailed close to the land. We stopped only to fill our bottles with fresh water. Soon we started to notice the land was inhabited. Several times we saw people on the beach who were watching us. I wanted to stop and go to them, but the boy asked me not to do it. But then one group of these people looked very friendly. I waved to them. I tried to sign to the people that we needed food. They signed to me to come to the beach. 2 of them ran into the forest. They returned with some dry meat. We didn't want to approach the land, and they were too afraid to swim to us. So we didn't know how to reach the food. When the people saw this, they stepped back and were soon quite far from the food. We approached the food and took it on board. Then, we weren't scared of them. They came to us. We thanked them, but we had nothing for them. At that moment, we saw 2 animals which were running down the hill. The people were scared. One animal attacked a young girl. I shot at it, and I killed the animal. The second animal was scared, and it ran away. The people were shocked when they heard the gun. They were also shocked when they saw the animal was dead. They were happy the girl was alive, and they thanked us. They brought us more food and water. On the 11th day, we saw a long piece of land, which was extending very far into the sea. There were also some islands far in the sea. I was thinking about going to the islands. Then the boy shouted, "Look, there is a ship." And really there was a ship quite far at the horizon. The boy was really scared. He thought it was a pirate ship. But I looked at the ship properly. It looked Portuguese. The ship was going away from us. Nobody on the ship saw us, so I fired a gun. They heard the gun. Then they saw us. They turned the ship and went to us. Soon we were on the Portuguese ship. They spoke Portuguese, Spanish, and French. But I didn't understand them. Fortunately, there was a Scottish sailor on the ship. He came to me. I told him our story. Then all the sailors started to be very nice to us. They agreed to take me and the boy on the ship. We were both very happy. We offered our things to the captain, but he didn't want to take them. He wanted to pay for them instead. It was very nice of him. I told him he could buy our boat, which I gave him a good price for. I asked for a half of usual price. He could take the rest of the things for free. The captain agreed. The captain also wanted to train the boy as a sailor. I didn't like this idea. I thought he was too young for this job. I thought the boy also needed freedom. He didn't need to start another service. Chapter 6. Wife. But the captain said it was good for the boy. The boy wanted to work for the captain. He wanted to be a sailor. Finally, I agreed. The ship was on the way to Brazil. We arrived there after 20 days. I said goodbye to the boy and the sailors. Brazil was a new state in South America. Many people started a new life there. It was the same for me. I didn't know anybody there. Soon I met people who had sugar plantations. They became my friends. I liked Brazil very much, and soon I learned the language. I had some money from the captain, and I bought a small land in Brazil. I started to produce sugar. I didn't produce much for the first 2 years, but then my plantation was growing fast. I was single, but my life was good. I was independent, and my financial situation improved every month. We paid only small taxes in Brazil. The society was new, and we didn't have many rules from the government. Soon I had enough money to be able to hire a lady for cleaning my house. I asked my friends if they knew about any good woman. One of my friends said, "I have a daughter who is 18 years old. I think she could work for you. She is also a very good cook." The next day his daughter came to my house. She was friendly but a little shy. She was also a very pretty girl. We talked shortly about what I needed from her. The next day she came to my house. She cleaned the dirty floor and my furniture. She took out the rubbish. She came to my house every morning on Monday and on Thursday, and she was working for 4 hours. She cleaned the house, and she also cooked for me. She gave food to my cat, too, who soon started to be a little fat. I was always happy to see the girl. Sometimes we had breakfast or lunch together and we talked. Then she was sick for a week. She couldn't come to my house. I felt a strange feeling when she wasn't in my house. I really missed her. I thought, maybe I am in love with her. 1 week later, she came to my house. I was really happy to see her. I could see she was happy too. I hugged her. Then I kissed her. It was a long kiss. 2 weeks later, I went to her father's house. I asked him if I could marry his daughter. He was quiet. I was waiting for his reaction. Then he said, "I agree." I was the happiest man in the world. 2 months later, I married the daughter of my friend. We started to plan a family. This period of my life was great. We had big plans for our family and our plantation. We needed a bigger house and we needed more money to be able to build a bigger house. I thought about the business in Africa. I knew I could make a lot of money in Africa quickly. I spoke about Africa with my friends who started to be interested in this idea. Chapter 7, Hurricane. One day, 3 of my friends came to our house. They told me they wanted to go to Africa. They asked me if I wanted to go with them. I said, yes, I want to go with you. We started to prepare all the necessary things for the journey. Soon we were ready to go. I said goodbye to my wife and we started our journey. Our plan was to be back in 2 months. We left Brazil on the 1st of September, 1655. Our ship was very big, but we were only 17 men. The ship was full of things for business. We had cups, glass, mirrors, knives, and other products. At the beginning of our journey, the weather was very good but very hot. In 1 week, a hurricane came, and it was threatening our ship for the next 12 days. After the hurricane passed, we saw we went quite far from our original journey and were instead close to the northern part of Brazil near the Orinoco River. The ship was so badly damaged, we could no longer go to Africa. The captain wanted us to go back and repair the ship, but I strongly disagreed with him. We went over the maps and decided the best thing to do was to go to Barbados and repair the ship there. When we started this short trip, a second hurricane came. The next morning, one of the sailors cried out, "Land!" And at that moment, the ship stopped in shallow water. We expected the ship to break apart at any moment because of the strong wind, so we all got into the small boat the ship carried. This was very dangerous because the 17 of us were crowded in the boat and it had no sail. The waves were very big. The wind was extremely strong. The wind pushed us to big rocks. We knew the crash was close. Suddenly, a huge wave appeared and overturned the boat. I was covered with water and couldn't breathe. I couldn't see the others or the boat, but I saw a little beach between the rocks. Another wave carried me to the beach. I was half dead with all the water that came into my body. I was still in water, but I felt a land under my feet. I could hardly move, but I knew I had to go further onto the land. I didn't want another wave to carry me back into the sea. Before I could get to my feet, another wave came and I was washed into the water. I couldn't breathe for a while, but then another wave threw me back on the beach. I tried to get up. I tried to go further from the sea. I was able to move 10 meters up. I was safe, but my arms and legs were very weak. I collapsed, and I was lying on the beach. After some time, I got up. I looked for the others. I couldn't find the other men. I was probably the only person alive. All my friends were dead. I only found 3 hats and 2 shoes on the beach. It was horrible for me. The weather was still very bad, but the waves weren't as big anymore, and I could see the ship. It was far from the land. I looked around and noticed I had almost nothing. I was wet and had no other clothes. I had nothing to eat or drink and nothing with which to defend myself if an animal attacked me. Chapter 8. Island. All I found in my pockets was a knife and a little box with tobacco. The situation was really bad. How could I possibly survive with only these things? Before sunset, I explored the place and looked for some fresh water. I found it in a small river. Then, I made myself a weapon from a short stick to protect myself against dangerous animals. I decided to spend the night up in a tree. When I woke up the next morning, the sea was calm. I was surprised to discover that the waves had moved the ship. The ship was now very close to the rocks where I almost died last night. The ship wasn't moving. I took off my clothes and swam to the ship. I didn't see any way to get inside the big ship, so I swam around it twice. The second time, I saw a rope hanging on one side. I used it to climb up, and when I was on board, I began to search for food and tools I could use. I was very lucky because some of the food on the ship was dry. I went into the kitchen and filled my pockets with biscuits. I was eating them while I was exploring the other cabins. I also found a bottle of rum, which I took with me. There was no other boat on the ship, and I needed one to carry the food and tools to the beach. That's why I took some boards and made a raft. I discovered 3 big wooden boxes and put them on my raft. I filled the first one with the bread, cheese, and meat I found. I found some more bottles of alcohol, which I also put on the raft. Then I heard something. Somebody was on the ship. Who was it? Somebody from my friends? It wasn't possible. My friends were all dead. I was a little scared. I went to the place where I heard the noises, and then I saw who it was. It was a dog. It was the dog of our captain. Now I had a friend. I wasn't alone anymore. Then I noticed the tide was getting high again, and the clothes I had left on the beach were already in the water. I was still on the ship, so I looked for more clothes. While I was looking for clothes, I found a box with some tools. I also found a nice carpet next to the box. Then I looked for guns, which I needed to protect myself and to hunt. I found 4 guns and 3 boxes of gunpowder. 2 of them were dry. I put all these things on my raft. The sea was calm, the tide was rising, and the wind was blowing to the land. Soon I was back on the beach. I started to look for a place where I could stay. I saw a hill and thought that from the hill I could see where I was. I took a gun and some gunpowder and started walking to it. When I was on the top, I saw the sea around the whole place. I was on an island. I could see 2 small islands nearby. One was to the north, and one was to the west. I also saw a big land to the south. It was about 100 kilometers away. I saw nothing to the east. I saw only the ocean. I couldn't see any sign of people on my island, only wild animals. Chapter 9. Tent. I saw many birds on the way back from the hill. I didn't recognize them. I killed one, but its meat wasn't good. I went back to the raft and spent the rest of the day pulling the boxes and my other discoveries further inland. While I was working, I thought that I had to go back to the ship again. I needed to get everything useful that was on it because the first storm might break it into pieces. I had to make myself a place for the night. I made a kind of tent and brought all the things that could be destroyed by rain or sun inside. The night was close. I put some clothes on the ground. I wanted to sleep on them. I also put 4 guns around me. Then I felt safe. I was tired from all the work and fell asleep very soon. The next day, I left my clothes in the tent and swam back to the ship. On board, I made a second raft. I found a couple of bags with nails. There were also 7 bullets for the guns and some more gunpowder. I took all the clothes I could find. There were also some bedheads, which I thought could be useful to me. I brought all this safely to the beach. From then on, I went to the ship every day. In this way, I brought many useful tools and objects. The third time I went, I brought as many ropes and sails as I could carry. Some days later, I discovered more bread, rum, and also some sugar. All of this I brought back with me to the beach. One day, I discovered a drawer full of scissors, knives, and forks. There were also some coins from Europe and Brazil. I knew the money was worthless on the island, but still, I took it. I also found playing cards with pictures of the king and the queen. I thought I might have some fun with the cards. It was my 12th visit to the ship. The next day, I went to the ship, but the sky was getting dark. Clouds were gathering, and the wind was getting stronger. I knew it was no use making a raft when a storm was approaching, so I swam back to the beach. That night, the wind was very strong, but I was safe inside my little tent. The next morning, the ship was gone. I knew I had to make myself a better place where I would be more comfortable. I realized I could stay on the island for a long time, and I wanted to create a nice place for me to live. I also needed to be safe. I could look for a cave, or I could make a bigger tent. Maybe I could do both. I needed a place that was close to fresh water, hidden from the heat of the sun, and easy to protect from both people and animals. Last but not least, it had to have a view of the sea so I could easily see a ship passing nearby. I found a nice place next to a steep hill, and I decided to put my tent there. The hill protected me from one side, and I built a fence on all the other sides. There was no door, but I used a short ladder to go over the fence, which I then took with me inside. I brought all my stuff inside and made 2 tents, a small tent and a big one. Chapter 10. Calendar. The smaller tent was inside the bigger tent. The bigger tent protected the gunpowder and the food from the rain. I lived in the smaller tent. When I finished the tents, I started digging at the bottom of the hill. I was bringing the stones and earth I got from there to the fence. In this way, I made a terrace on the inner side of the fence. I wanted to use the cave at the bottom of the hill as a cellar. One day, while I was still working on the cave, a storm appeared. There was lightning followed by loud thunder. It came to my mind that lightning could hit one of the boxes with gunpowder. It could destroy everything and even kill me. I was scared. As soon as the storm went away, I opened the big boxes with gunpowder. I started dividing the gunpowder into bags and smaller boxes, which I then hid in the rocks. I had a lot of powder, so this took me 3 days. I also went hunting every day. It was a break from the hard work, and it provided me with meat. I also started to know the island and its inhabitants better. I discovered some goats and hunted them. Then I had enough meat. Some days, I was very sad. I thought about my wife. I missed her a lot. I thought about my friends in Brazil, and I thought about my parents. I felt that living on this island alone was meaningless. I often walked along the beach and regretted my choice to travel by sea. I knew that traveling by sea could change your life completely. It could be great, but it could be horrible too. I knew my friends from the ship were dead. It was horrible. On the other hand, I was alive, and I was grateful for that. I was also lucky to have all the tools, food, clothes, and guns from the ship. Without them, I could hardly survive a week. I decided to make a big cross and put it on the beach near the place of my arrival to the island. I wrote on it the date of my arrival, the 30th of September, 1659. I wanted to keep track of time. The cross was my calendar. I made a small cut in the cross every day. The 7th cut was longer. It marked the end of the week. The beginning of each month also had a longer cut. One day, when I was thinking about my situation, I realized I had a lot of negative thoughts. It wasn't good, so I decided to do something about it. I made a list of all the good and bad things that happened to me. I was alone on this island and had little hope of ever going back to civilization. On the other hand, I was saved, and I didn't die in the storm that killed my friends. I had food to eat. I didn't have a lot of clothes, but the weather was such that I hardly needed any. I had a dog. He understood some words. He understood when I said, "Sit down, come here, bring it, don't do it, don't jump, let's eat, let's run." This list helped me realize that all bad things come with something good in them. I tried to concentrate on positive things only. I continued to make my place better and better. I made the cave bigger. More space in the cave helped me keep all my things organized. Chapter 11. Book. Then I started to make some furniture. I needed a chair and a table very much. I used the boards from my rafts and the ship to make them. Next, I made shelves inside the cave and arranged my tools on them. My clothes and guns were hanging there as well. I was very pleased with my work. The cave was comfortable, everything was in order, and I could easily find whatever I needed. I decided to write a book. I wanted to describe my daily activities in it. It did me good to put my thoughts to paper. I started by writing down my experiences from the very first day on the island up to the present. I continued describing interesting or important events in my life on the island. I decided to make a schedule to organize my time better. Every morning I walked for a few hours, then I worked until noon. I had lunch and slept for 2 hours after lunch. Then I continued working until the evening. I was expanding my cave with the tools I had. I needed to make the cave big enough as it was going to be my kitchen, living room, bedroom, and cellar all at once. When I almost finished my cave, a great quantity of earth fell down from one side. I was scared because this could have killed me if I had been in the cave at that time. Afterwards, I had a lot of work to clean the cave. The next week, I spent putting long boards on the side and also on the ceiling of the cave. I wanted to avoid such a disaster from happening again. Little by little, I began arranging the furniture in my new home. The next 3 days, the weather was bad. It was raining day and night, but it was still warm, so I continued with my tasks inside. It was never cold on the island. It was good for me. At the end of December, I killed a goat. I also hurt another one. Its leg was broken, so I took the goat home on a string and took care of it. After 2 weeks, the goat wasn't scared. This event made me consider keeping animals so I could provide food for myself. When the gunpowder was finished, I explored the island and found more goats in the valleys in the center of the island. The animals were very shy, which made it difficult to approach them. I wanted to try to domesticate some goats. I only needed an opportunity to do it. I had a plan. I returned with my dog the next day. He was my hunting partner. I told my dog, "Sit down, wait, don't move." Then I went around the goats, but at a big distance. When the goats were between me and my dog, I hid behind a tree. Then I shouted at my dog, "Come here!" He started to run to me, and the goats did too. Chapter 12. Corn. I stayed in my place behind the tree. When one of the goats was close to me, I jumped up and caught its leg. I was holding the goat for 2 seconds, but then the goat kicked me in the nose with its second leg. It hurt a lot. I let the goat go, and it was soon gone. We weren't successful. This wasn't a good way to catch a goat. We had to do it differently. I told my dog, "Let's go home. I need some rest." I spent the period between January and March working on my fence. It took me a long time because I wanted to make it very thick and strong. Meanwhile, I found pigeons on the island. They weren't nesting in the trees, but in holes in the rocks. This made them easy to capture, and their meat was good. I could also cook and eat their eggs. This is what I was surviving on while I was working on my fence. While cleaning and arranging my home, I found a small bag. There used to be corn inside, but now there were only some leaves and dust at the bottom of it. I emptied it outside my fence because I needed the bag for gunpowder. This was just before the rains. About a month later, I was surprised to find a few green leaves growing there. It was young corn. Words couldn't express how happy I was to discover corn growing just outside my fence. It was fantastic. I could bake bread in the future. On the 16th of March, I was inside my house when I saw pieces of earth falling from the roof of my cave. I was frightened and thought all my efforts would be lost again. I ran outside the cave. Suddenly, I noticed the ground was shaking everywhere. It was an earthquake. I was paralyzed with fear. Some big stones were falling from the hill, but I was lucky. They didn't hit my tent. Although the earthquake was soon over, I was afraid to go inside the cave. I sat on the ground in front of my tent, still very upset and scared to enter. I started to think that it was better not to sleep in the cave. It wasn't very safe in case another earthquake came. But I didn't want to sleep in the tent, so I decided to make a house instead of the tent. I wanted to use the cave only as a cellar. The next day, I started to build the house. It was April, and it took me 3 months to build it, but I was happy with my new home. I was ill in the last week of July. I had a temperature and couldn't get out of bed. I was very weak and could do nothing in that state. I had crazy dreams. The dreams weren't very logical, but for me, they were real. Chapter 13. Dream one of my dreams was really crazy. I was in a pub that was on my island. I wanted to drink some rum, but the waitress was extremely lazy. She sat at the bar and did nothing. I didn't like her attitude. I was angry, but I waited. Then my wife came to the pub. She gave me a piece of paper with some text. It was a message from her father. He wrote, "Come home. You should work on the plantations." But I didn't want to go home. I went to the kitchen in the pub. There was my mother in the kitchen, who was preparing some steaks, and she was also cooking soup. I tasted the soup, which was fantastic. Then 2 Englishmen came to the pub. They wanted to sell me gunpowder. One man looked like a gentleman, but the second man was horrible. I told the horrible man, "I'm sorry, I don't need your gunpowder. I have a lot of gunpowder in my camp." "What did you say?" said the horrible man. "Our gunpowder isn't good for you. This is the main reason why we are here. We've traveled from London. You have to buy our gunpowder." I said, "Thank you, but I don't want your gunpowder." The man was really angry. Our conversation was getting worse and worse. He said some horrible things about me, and I said some horrible things about him. The conversation got to a point when he wanted to kill me. When he took his gun, I started to run away. He shot at me, and at that moment, I woke up. 1 week later, I felt better, but I still needed to relax. I needed to sleep a lot. In August, I was okay again. I still felt a little weak, though. I knew I needed to do some physical exercise. The next 10 days, I walked around the island. This exercise made me feel better. When I felt strong again, I decided to explore the whole island. I found a new valley where I saw some tobacco plants among other unknown ones. The next day I found melons and grapes. I dried the grapes and I had raisins. There were also apple, orange, and lemon trees on the island which I hadn't noticed before. I made a pile of the fruits that I gathered and returned to my cave to get a bag for them. When I returned, I found the fruits destroyed. Some were eaten, some were stepped upon. I concluded from this that there were some wild animals around. Still, I liked that fruit valley, and I began thinking about moving there. Then I remembered that the beach was far away from that valley, and I wouldn't see if any ship passed by. Chapter 14. House. Instead of moving to the fruit valley, I decided to build another house there, which I would visit from time to time. I made a small house and then surrounded it with a double fence. The house was protected like a castle. Again, I used a ladder to go in and out, but I also had stairs on the inside of the fence. I used stairs on the inside and a ladder on the outside. This activity took me the whole of August and the beginning of September, but I enjoyed it a lot. The fruit valley gave me so much energy. I felt so healthy and strong there. Sometimes, when I was in the valley at night, I watched the moon and the stars. I thought about my wife. I thought about my family in England. I knew they could see the same moon, they could see the same stars, but we couldn't be together. I thought about my family very often. I wished the best for them. I also thought about all the people who could see the moon. I imagined the places where they lived. I felt connected with them. Sometimes I felt connected with the whole universe. I also thought about God. I had questions for God. I asked him, "Why am I on this island? What is the reason for it? Why am I still alive when my friends are dead?" I didn't have answers to many of these questions, but I trusted God. I believed he knew what he was doing. Then the rainy season started, which continued until the middle of October. This was my first year on the island. After the rains ended, I returned to my valley house to find the branches in the fence all green, with new leaves growing all over them. This wasn't only beautiful, but also useful to me, because soon my house was covered entirely and was hardly visible. The leaves kept shade over it, and it was very pleasant to stay there during the dry season. I liked it so much that I decided to make a fence from the same branches around my first house as well. With the end of the rainy season, I thought it was the right time to put my seeds into the ground. I was cautious, so I only used half of the seeds. This was a good idea because none of these seeds came up. I put the rest of the seeds in the ground just before the next rainy season, and they came up all right. Now I had a little farm on the island. This experience made me notice that there were 2 rainy and 2 dry seasons on the island. With this in mind, I could now plan when to put seeds into the ground. Chapter 15. Basket. Soon. I realized I needed baskets. With baskets, I could carry more food when I made my trips around the island. I could also carry more fruit from the fruit valley. I cut branches from the same tree that I used for both my fences. After drying these branches, I used them to make baskets. When I finished that, I decided to take another longer trip around the island. After passing the fruit valley, I found pleasant grass fields. They were very flat. They had a lot of flowers, and they smelled so good. A lot of insects were flying around these flowers. I could see some big butterflies. Their wings were 10 centimeters wide. There were small trees around these fields. I found nuts on these trees. These nuts were different from nuts in England. They had a different shape. They were also sweeter than nuts in England. I also discovered that there were many parrots, rabbits, and cats on this side of the island. I even caught one parrot and took it with me. There were also many turtles and other birds there. This part of the island was more pleasant and had more food, but I didn't want to move. On the way back, my dog captured a young kid, which I saved and took with me. I wanted to keep goats very much, and now I was offered another chance. I left the kid in the valley house until I prepared a space for it in my first home. I was so tired from the trip that on my return I relaxed the whole day. I made a cage for the parrot and brought home the kid, which started to calm down. I made a map of the whole island and put these newly discovered places on the map. Time passed so quickly, and soon it was September again. This was my second year on the island. I was no longer as sad and desperate as I was immediately after my arrival. I accepted my destiny, and I was grateful for being well and alive. I still kept my daily schedule. I was hunting in the morning, cooking at lunchtime, relaxing in the afternoon when it was the hottest, and working in the evening. I also taught the parrot to say his name. His name was Pole. In the months of November and December, I was busy with my fields. The wild goats and rabbits were eating the little plants. I risked losing all of it, so I quickly made a fence around the place where I put the seeds in the ground. I put my dog inside the fence to guard my corn at night. Soon the plants were tall, but then another danger appeared. Birds of all kinds started eating the seeds. I shot some and kept an eye on my corn until the rest of the birds were gone. Chapter 16. Bread. At the end of December, I had my first corn. It wasn't a lot, and I didn't want to eat the corn, so I decided to leave it all for seeds. My goal was to put the seeds in the ground again and have more corn later. Meanwhile, I began preparing the tools I would need in a year's time. I realized I needed pots to keep the corn. I looked for clay around the island. I found some, and after 2 months of experiments, I succeeded in making 2 large pots. To protect them better, I put them in baskets and placed dry grass between the baskets and the pots. I continued making small pots and plates. I also made long but not very high pots. I put seawater in these pots. When the water was gone, I had salt. One day, quite by accident, I found a broken piece of one of my pots in the fire. The heat made it as hard as stone, and it was very, very red, too. This gave me a good idea. I took one pot and made a fire around it. The pot was very hard after a few hours. I was happy with the result. I also felt a need for some other tools. For example, I needed a tool to make flour from seeds. I took a big piece of hardwood for that. I made a hole in the wood. Then I took another piece of hardwood and broke the seeds in this hole with the wood. The flour stayed on the bottom of the hole. I thought I would need something to bake bread. I had an idea. I mixed the flour with water. Then I took 2 stones, put them near the fire, and when they were very hot, I put the bread between them. This was how I made my first bread on the island. It was during my 3rd year on the island. The bread wasn't perfect, but I liked it a lot. It was my first bread after a long time. I was thinking about whether I could make a canoe out of some large tree. I found one big tree, cut it, and started to make a hole in it. One day, while I was working on the canoe, I realized I didn't know how to move it from the forest to the beach. I was stupid. It took me many days to make the canoe, and the thought of how I was going to put it in water never came to my mind. I tried everything to move the canoe. I even considered digging a channel from the beach to where the canoe stayed, but it was all useless. There was a hill in between, and it would have taken me a long time to dig the channel through the hill. Eventually, I gave up on the canoe. Many days of work were lost. I couldn't believe that I made such a mistake. I had to. Chapter 17. Canoe. During my 4th year on the island, my clothes were already very old. Instead, I began using the skins of the animals I killed. I made myself a cap and some other clothes entirely out of those skins. They kept me cool in the heat and protected me from the heavy rain. But the clothes weren't enough. I also needed an umbrella for the same purposes. It took me a while, but I succeeded in making one. I was quite happy with my life on the island. I had everything I needed. I continued living like that for the next 5 years. I kept on growing my corn and continued drying grapes to make raisins. All my activities remained the same during this time. I decided to make a new canoe. It was smaller and easier to move. I wanted to travel around the island in it. When the canoe was finished, I put food, water, and tools in it. I was ready for the trip. I wanted to test if I could go around the island in my canoe. It was the 6th of June in the 6th year of my stay on the island that I started this trip. I faced danger as soon as I started my journey. I had to go around some rocks in the sea. When I wanted to go back to the coast, I realized there was a strong current. The current was taking me away from the island. The situation was horrible. I was scared and thought I would die in the open sea. I didn't have enough food and water for a long journey. I fought very hard against the current for 2 hours. Finally, I managed to get close to my island. Now I could continue my trip around the island. I knew I was stronger than the currents, and that made me feel good. Soon, I found a small river that went further inside the island, but I got nowhere because soon the river was very narrow and stones blocked the way. I couldn't continue. I got off my canoe and went to explore this part of the island. It wasn't far from the part of the island I knew. I even found the way to my house in the valley. I was so tired from the trip that I fell asleep. I was woken up by a voice. The voice was saying, "Robinson, where are you?" Robinson, where are you? I was scared at first, but then I saw my parrot, Pole, on top of the hedge. He learned the phrases I repeated to myself so many times. Now he was saying them with the same intonation I used. I was surprised to find the parrot here because I left it in my house. Still, I was happy to hear someone talk to me. I left the canoe there and returned home with the parrot. I didn't take such long trips for a year, and I was staying in my house most of the time. I kept on making wooden tools and clay pots. I even found a way to make pots with a wheel, which made my work much lighter. I also figured out how to make a tobacco pipe, which I missed a lot ever since I came to this island. Chapter 18. Food. One day, I also noticed I was running out of gunpowder. I was worried I wouldn't be able to kill any more goats once it was gone. The kid I once caught was old, and it was too late to try to find a male for her. I wanted meat, but I didn't have the heart to kill her. One day, she died a natural death. It was 11 years since I first came to this island, and all this time I was using gunpowder to provide myself with meat. Now I thought of finding some other way to supply myself with food. I decided to make some traps. I didn't succeed at first, but eventually I caught 3 young goats, 1 male and 2 females. I took them home with me. I had to make a fence for them because I feared they might run away with the wild ones once they were adults. It took me 3 months, but I made a nice fence around a suitable space where there was a lot of grass and water for them. After some time, the young goats became very calm, and they were eating out of my hand. In 2 years, I had a dozen goats, and in 3 years' time, I had more than 20 goats. This way, I had a lot of milk and meat. I experimented several times, and at last, I managed to make cheese and butter. My table was full now, and I was surrounded by animals. My old dog, cats, goats, and pole, my parrot. The only thing I still missed was someone to talk to. One day I set out to reach that part of the island where the strong current was. On the way there, I thought to myself how ridiculous I would have appeared if some Englishman saw me. I had a big hat, a short jacket, and short trousers, all made out of goat skin. I didn't have socks or shoes, but I put some goat skin around my feet. I had 2 belts, one for the gun and knife and one for the gunpowder. On my back I had a basket, and I also carried a gun on my shoulder and an umbrella made out of goat skin above my head. My beard was pretty long, and I realized I was looking very unusual compared to how I used to look years ago. One day, around lunchtime, I was walking on the beach to check on my canoe when I came across something surprising. I saw the mark of a human footprint in the sand. I looked around, but I couldn't see anyone. I was scared and hurried back to my home. I was so frightened that I couldn't sleep that night. Why was there no canoe? Why were there no more footprints? I thought that maybe it was the footprint of one of the people who probably inhabited the islands around. I began to worry whether they saw my canoe and were now preparing to attack me. Then I convinced myself that maybe I saw the mark of my own foot, and I was a fool to get scared by it. This realization made me feel better. I took my courage and went to see the footprint again. Chapter 19. Cannibals. When I approached the footprint, I saw that the footprint was much bigger than the size of my foot. It was impossible that the footprint was mine. I got scared again. That night I considered letting all my animals into the wild, destroying my fields and my summer house so that no mark of human habitation was left on the island. I was so afraid that I couldn't fall asleep the whole night. In the morning, I finally fell asleep for a short time. When I woke up, my head was clear. Now it didn't seem that strange that people lived on the islands around. Maybe they came to my island from time to time, or now the wind carried them this way. For the first time, I remembered that for the 15 years I lived on the island, I didn't meet any human being or discover any signs of a settlement here. This calmed me down. Still, I wanted to be safe. I made another wall around my house and left holes through which I could easily fire several guns if attacked. Now I had such a strongly protected house, surrounded by walls and thick trees, that no one could come near me. I was also worried about my goats. I divided the animals and built a smaller fence in another part of the island. It took me a lot of time and effort, but in the end, my animals were safe from any unexpected attack. It was the 16th year of my life on the island when something very sad happened. My dog died. I was crying for 3 days. It was my worst day on the island. I went to my goats and told them how sad I was. They didn't understand my words, but I felt they understood me. They felt my emotions. They were unusually calm and quiet. It was now 2 years after the footprint on the beach. One day, as I was walking towards the beach, I thought I saw a canoe in the distance. I couldn't be sure, so I just continued my walk. It was then that I came across something terrifying. The whole beach was covered with human remains. Skulls, hands, and feet were all over the place, and there was a black circle from a fire. I was angry and scared at the same time. They were here again. I thought I was sick and threw up at the horrible sight. I went back to my house and again considered what to do. I decided to give up going out to sea with my canoe because the cannibals could capture me. I also stopped firing guns because I feared being discovered by the sound. Every time I went out of my house, I carried guns to protect myself in case of a sudden attack. Soon I started thinking about how I could kill some of the cannibals and save their victims if I could. If that wasn't possible, at least I could frighten them, so they would never come here again. I began looking at that side of the island where I first saw the human footprint. I wanted to find a hiding place for myself and prepare it for the attack. Then I changed my mind and thought it was unreasonable to fight them because they hadn't done any harm to me. Chapter 20. Cave. Eventually, I gave up the preparations altogether and decided to act only if they attacked me first. For a whole year, I was hiding my activities as well as I could. I hid my canoe, kept myself occupied with my animals and fields, but I was very careful. I was afraid to make loud noises and was worried every time I made a fire. But I needed fire because I needed to cook. So when I made a fire, I tried to make as little smoke as possible. Smoke could go very high and be seen from a distance. Once, when I was cutting some branches in the forest, I discovered a small cave. I went inside. But as soon as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I noticed two bright eyes looking at me. I jumped outside, scared to death. I waited, but nothing happened. I went slowly to the entrance of the cave and listened. I heard something. It sounded as if there was somebody injured inside. I took my gun and entered the cave slowly. When my eyes could see again, I discovered an old goat. It was dying in the cave. I returned to the cave the next day to find out that the goat was dead. I explored the place and found it very safe. It would make a great hiding place near the beach. That's why I brought some of my guns and some gunpowder there. 23 years passed since I first stepped on this island. Now I was living comfortably and had many animals to keep me company. Pole was repeating my name very pleasantly. I had 2 more parrots, and I taught all of them to pronounce my name. It was the last month of my 23rd year on the island when, as I was walking to my fields early one morning, I saw fire on the beach. I immediately returned to my house and loaded all my guns. I took my telescope and went close to the beach. I hid myself and observed them. I saw 9 naked people who came in 2 canoes. It seemed that they were waiting for the high tide to leave the island. As soon as they left, I went to the beach. It was full of blood and bones again. This made me sick and angry, and I decided to kill as many of them as I could the next time I saw them. They didn't return for a long time. Meanwhile, something else happened that disturbed my routine. One evening, I was disturbed out of my ordinary activities by the sound of a gun at sea. I got out of my house and saw a flash coming from the sea. A second shot followed. I thought it was coming from some ship in danger asking for help. I took all the dry wood I could find around and ran to the beach where I made a big fire. They probably saw the fire because they fired again. I thought, I will speak to somebody tonight. This is great. I kept the fire until midnight, but there was no sign of them. It was strange, something my brain couldn't understand. Maybe in the morning I would know more, I thought. Chapter 21. Visitors. The next morning I saw the ship. The ship stopped far from the beach. It looked empty. I didn't understand it. I expected the people who fired the gun yesterday. I really wanted to communicate with somebody. I missed communication with real people very much. I took my canoe and decided to go to the ship to see if there was anybody still alive on board. The ship looked Spanish, and it was completely destroyed. When I got closer, I saw a dog. He was very happy to see me. I gave him bread and water. He was hungry and extremely thirsty. I found nobody on the ship. What happened to the men from the ship? I thought it was very strange. I didn't have an answer to this question. It was a mystery. There were many boxes with different things on the ship. Some boxes were small, some boxes were big. Many of the big boxes had bottles with alcohol in them, but these boxes were too heavy. I couldn't take them on the canoe. I found guns and gunpowder, and I took them to the canoe. I also found some other useful things. I returned to the island in the evening with several small boxes on my canoe. I had some new shirts and also gold, silver, and a lot of gunpowder. Gunpowder was important to me on the island. It was more valuable than any money or precious metals. There was something else I needed very much. Shoes. I found 2 pairs of shoes on board the ship, and I took them with me. I put all my new things in the cave. I made 5 trips to the ship, taking everything useful for me. Then I hid the canoe again and went back to my house. Everything went back to normal. Time went quickly. I often thought about the men from the ship and the cannibals on the beach. These thoughts were always in the back of my mind, day and night. It was one night in March when I dreamed that 2 canoes with cannibals landed on the beach. One of their victims ran away and came to my house where I saved him. Then we became friends, and he helped me navigate out of the dangerous currents around the island. I woke up, but the dream stayed in my mind. I realized that if I had somebody to help me, I might be able to escape from the island and reach the continent. Maybe I could save one of the victims brought to this island. I decided to look out for the cannibals, and for the next year and a half, I went daily around the beach, hoping to see canoes. This finally happened one morning. I saw 5 canoes with more than 30 men on the beach.